Hello, this is Edith Newmeyer, and I am the author of the book, The Mystery of Adam. I want to talk about Matthew 24 today. I have talked about it before in the past, but I have a lot of new subscribers, and Matthew 24 really is so difficult, and it is used so many times as a quote for the end times that it really needs to be addressed again. So this is what I'm going to do today. We're going to talk about Matthew 24. Now, Matthew 24 is paralleled, the same event is paralleled by Luke 21 and Mark 13. They both write about the same kind of event, but they are much more chronological. Matthew is harder to understand because it is not chronological, and people don't seem to understand that. They don't seem to understand that Matthew 24 really spans a time of almost 2,000 years. Actually, it starts a span of time from the time when Jesus died on the cross all the way to the start of the millennium, or Christ's reign. Okay, Christ's reign. So that's quite a long time. That's at least 2,000 years. And people don't understand that. Now, we see in the beginning of Matthew very clearly that Jesus starts with the destruction of the temple. And people totally ignore that. Jesus walks by the temple with the disciples, and he says, not one stone will be on top of the other. And so then the disciples ask him, when will that happen? Now, Matthew brings in the end times. For some reason, Matthew was thinking that the destruction of the temple is connected to the end times. Okay? Please keep in mind that Matthew, again, even Matthew 24 and the rest is not always chronological, but specifically Matthew 24 is not chronological. Okay, so Luke did not make that connection with the end times if you read Luke, but Matthew did. He made a connection with the end times, and so he added end times prophecy that Jesus told them to in this chapter. Okay, in this chapter. Now, when we look at Matthew 24 all the way to verse 29, okay, and I hope you have Matthew 24 open right now. You can stop and then look at, your own Bible, Matthew 24. When we go all the way to 29, okay, that is this time span. So over half of this chapter is about the destruction of the temple. Half of it is not even about the end. Remember, in the beginning, and we can go there, they ask him, tell us, they said in verse 3, when will this happen? And Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple before that, before 3. Okay, when will that happen? What will be the sign, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of ages? Okay, when they say, when will that happen? They are talking about the destruction of the temple. And you can see that Matthew makes a connection between the destruction of the temple and the end times. There are 2,000 years in between, almost 2,000 years in between. And people ignore that all the time. A whole chapter is about 2,000-year time span. So over half of this chapter, 24, is about the destruction of the temple. Please become aware of that. Okay? Now, it says in verse 29, it says, immediately after the distress of those days. Okay, what distress is he talking about, and when did the distress start? Well, he starts, of course, with the destruction of the temple. So he describes in 28 verses or less, because it doesn't start until verse 4, he describes the destruction of the temple. And people constantly confuse that. Why? Because dispensationalism has brainwashed them and conditioned them to believe that these verses have something to do with an unfulfilled 1 week of the truce, which is a lie. And of course, we have to go back to Daniel's 70 weeks in Daniel 9. All 70 weeks have been fulfilled. And it is a lie to say, and I'm not going into detail right now, okay? If you want to know about this last week of Daniel, the 70th week, please put it on the comment section and I will explain it to you, okay? If you are new to my channel and you don't know that part, the 70th week is fulfilled. There is no abomination of desolation going to happen again. The abomination of desolation has happened in 70 AD. It's about desolation. It's not about somebody defiling the temple of God, which don't even exist. A physical temple of God will not exist anymore. There is now the temple of God, which is the church or the bride of Christ. That's the temple of God right now in heaven, okay? Which Jesus is building, which Messiah is building. There is not going to be a third temple that is the temple of God. So even if there's an antichrist, he can never defile that temple, because that temple is already an abomination, because it's not the temple of God, because it's a false temple, okay? So please make sure you get that. So this beginning, this abomination of desolation, is talking about desolation, the destruction of the temple that Jesus was talking about. He started this whole section of chapter 24, to tell about the destruction of the temple. You need to read the whole section. See, people, they love to pull out verses, okay? 2-3 verses, and they built their whole theology on it. You have to understand the whole thing, okay? You have to understand at least the whole chapter. And again, make no mistake, chapters were added later. They did not come from the writers. So we have to be very careful with chapters anyways. But we need to start in the beginning, when Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple. And then he says, when you see these signs that the temple will be destroyed, then flee. Okay? Flee. So, but let's go back, because I really want to not get distracted with the beginning of Matthew 24. Okay? I want to focus at the end. So all the way to verse 29 is all about the time around the destruction of the temple. That's what Jesus was about. Now, Matthew was not aware, the disciples during that time, not even Paul, John, they were not aware that it would take 2,000 years for Jesus' return. When they thought destruction of temple, they thought this is when Jesus would come. Okay? They thought that Jesus would return during their lifetime. Okay? So when they heard, that this generation will not pass away, they actually thought it was their generation, that would see the return of Jesus. Why? Because they didn't see it correctly. The Holy Spirit did not reveal it to them. It's something that we are in our generation, the end time generation, know better. But there are still lots and lots of people, well, probably most people, because they're listening to dispensationalism and false teachers. They believe that this Matthew 24 is all about the end times. Half of it is not about the end times. Then he goes to 29, says, immediately after the distress of those days. Okay? What days is he talking about? Well, he's talking about lots of days. Okay? All the way from the beginning of when Jesus died. And the disciples were persecuted. Because the disciples were persecuted right away. Okay? Of course, it culminated. And then they were, stoned and flogged and thrown into, prison. You know about Peter. Okay. So all this happened. We know about this. So all this is also talking about the destruction of the temple, which is also the destruction of Jerusalem and all the wars that the Jews went through. The Jews were almost extinct during that time. Okay, very few Jews made it during that time, and the ones that made it were sent into captivity, and that was or slavery, and that was really not very many. Okay, so this whole section, all the way to 29, is about the destruction of the temple, and then Matthew says immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. This is a quote, okay, from the Old Testament, and I'm going to look it right here, see if I can find it. Isaiah 13:10 and Isaiah 34:4. This is where this is written in the Old Testament. And here Matthew uses it again. This is the starting point now of the wrath of God, not the tribulation. Okay? He said immediately after the distress of those days. The King James says tribulation. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Okay? Distress, tribulation, same thing. Some translated distress. King James translated with tribulation. This is not talking about this great tribulation. It's not what this is talking about. This is talking about immediately after the distress of those days. Distress. Who had distress? All saints had distress. Okay, the saints, the beginning saints in Jerusalem, the first saints, they already had distress. Tremendous distress. We read that from verse 4 on to verse 29. Tremendous stress. If you want to read more about it, read Josephus, okay, in his War of the Jews. And I think it's book 4 or 5, or read both of them, 4 and 5. And there's also a little book that I will quote on the bottom that you can read, because it's very important to understand when we want to understand Matthew. Okay? It's actually a book that explains this first part of Matthew very well, and it takes in the accounts, the eyewitness accounts of Josephus. Okay? But that's why I don't want to go into detail. So, continuing with 29, immediately after the distress or the tribulation of those days. Okay, so first we have the tribulation. Then we have the sun will be darkened. And again, this is the start of the wrath of God, people. Okay, that is in the Old Testament, that signifies the start of the wrath of God. Go to Revelation 6:12, the sixth seal. Same thing. He uses the same similar words. Luke 21, Mark 13. They all use similar words to now signify that the wrath of God is starting. Okay? So I hope people do understand that. And again, of course, the Old Testament. It all shows the wrath of God is starting, not great tribulation. We are done with great tribulation when we get to verse 29. Okay, we're done with great tribulation. Or yes, the great tribulation that these saints went through. And I hope people do understand that. Now, it does not say anything about the rapture, does it? Okay, because I said Matthew is not chronological. So really the rapture should happen, not should, but does happen just before the sun will be darkened. Okay? Just before the wrath of God starts. We can see that in Isaiah, and you can look that up, Isaiah 26:19 through 21. That the wrath is after the rapture. Okay? The death in Christ will rise, then we will go into the rooms, and then the wrath of God. Okay, it's very, very obvious. Now you have to understand other verses in the Bible, other sections in the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, okay, in order to understand that. But today I want to talk specifically about Matthew, because people use Matthew all the time to mislead people. I mean, all the time. Okay? It seems that's the only thing that they are actually quoting. Why? Because maybe false teachers know it is confusing. So let's continue. So why is the rapture not mentioned here? Well, simply because, number one, Matthew didn't know when the rapture is going to happen. Matthew most likely didn't also even know about this rapture. Okay? And of course, like I said already, Matthew didn't know it takes 2,000 years. But he wrote down these things that Jesus said, and he put them down the way he thought. Okay? And they were not chronological. Because now the next section is exactly, what will happen after the wrath of God. We see what? Verse 29 about the wrath of God. And all of a sudden, in verse 30, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the people of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and glory. Okay? That shows now when Jesus actually is seen by everybody after the wrath of God. Okay? So these two are chronological. Okay? Jesus appears in the clouds, and everybody will see him and mourn. Now, this is not, everybody does not include the saints. Why would the saints mourn? The saints don't mourn when they see Jesus. They are happy. Only people that know they messed up, okay, and they missed the Messiah or the rapture will mourn, okay? Not the others. Not the saints. The saints will not mourn. Why are they not? Why are the saints not mentioned here? Because the saints were already raptured before the wrath of God. Now, I think most people understand that the saints will not go through the wrath of God. Paul said that in Thessalonians, and I believe it's Thessalonians 1, 1 Thessalonians 5. Okay. I think it says 5. It says we're not going through the wrath. Isaiah said that we're not going through the wrath. So it should be right that rapture will happen before the wrath of God, which is right here. The sun will be darkened, and immediately after the stress of those days. Okay? And we can also know that because Luke says, in Luke 21, he says, before the sun goes dark, he says, until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Okay? So we know when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, that's when the wrath happens. And that's when the rapture happens. Then the wrath. It's very simple. It's just we need to pull everything together. We cannot just pull things out of context. Okay? So here we have 30. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Okay, so this is again chronological, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and from one end of the heavens to the other. His elect, okay, that means the people that are believing, because there are going to be believers during that time. Okay? So either that's what it means, or it jumps back to when he elected. But because it says here, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call. Okay? But there is going to be many trumpet calls. Okay? Many trumpet calls. There's not just one trumpet, two trumpet, whatever. There's many trumpet calls. Okay? So if this is continuing with the verse 30, then this is about him now collecting the people that we see in, let's see, Revelation 20, when the souls were resurrected of the people that believe during the wrath of God. Because there's going to be people that will actually follow Messiah during the wrath of God, or will realize that they missed the bridegroom. If you go to chapter 25, the 10 virgins, there are 5 virgins that missed the bridegroom, and they're going through the wrath of God. Okay? And so they will be gathered at the end, because they probably most likely will be believers. Some will and some will not. Now learn the lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its fig gets tender and its leaf come out, you know that summer is near. Now, what is he saying here? He is saying, look at the signs. Now, you can apply this to either the signs that will come, so the disciples know when the temple is destroyed, because you need to be aware of that too. You can also apply this now to the time right now. Watch the signs. See when the bridegroom is returning. So this is just a general saying. Watch for the signs. You know the signs of the fig tree when the fig tree is ripe. So please discern the signs of the times as well. Okay? This is what he is saying. Now in 34, he is going back. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away. Now, see, all these are separate sayings. This is not chronological. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. When really should have been this verse. Okay? This should have been actually right before 29. Okay? But Matthew didn't know. Okay? In his brain, he didn't know the whole progression of things. So what does he do? And because of the way it's written, we get all confused. And then we have headings in there, okay? Like on top it says destruction of the temple and the signs of the end times. And then down here we say, the day of an hour is unknown. So the way they divide this, the Bible or the letters or the Gospels, are not in the original text. Okay, so when we go to verse 34, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not. This again can go back again to the destruction of the temple. Okay, and even this verse 34 can go back to the destruction of the temple when Jesus warned the disciple. Okay, so you can see that this section right here, 32 and 33 and 34, so 32 and through 34 can actually, or should maybe be really put before 29. Now I know people say, oh no. Yes, you need to understand that Matthew 24 is not written chronological. Okay? It isn't. And people think it is. And so they say, oh, you know what? The sun goes dark. That has to be, of course, the wrath of God, and Jesus is coming. Oh, that must be that must be the rapture. And then they see this generation shall not pass away. And then they think this is all about the 2,000 years. A generation doesn't last 2,000 years. This whole thing now is about a time span of 2,000 years. A generation does not go away. So what generation is Jesus talking about? He's talking about the generation who sees the destruction of the temple. Okay? From the time of Jesus to the destruction of the temple is one generation. Okay? 70 years. 70 years. One generation. Okay? Make no mistakes. This is yeah, it's a little confusing, but people think they have to just pull out some verses and explain whatever. Okay? So now then we are going to the verse 36. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. What day is he talking about now? He is now talking about the days of the end. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the beginning of the Son of Man. Okay? At the coming of the Son of Man. All right? So we know here he is talking about specifically the coming of the Son of Man. Very specific. So when is he talking about the days of Noah? When did they happen? The days of Noah happened, or the days like Noah, okay? Because the days of Noah are happening before the flood. That's what he is writing here, describing here. The days or the years before the flood. What did the people do before that? Okay, so this whole section goes before the time when the sun is going dark, during the time of distress or tribulation. I hope you understand that. So let's continue. So they're marrying, they're drinking, and nobody knows the day of the hour of what? Well, the day or the hour of the rapture. Okay? Because look what he says in verse, that is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Okay? And then, listen what he says in verse 40. He is now talking about the rapture. Okay? So he's talking about the days before the return of Jesus, which is, of course, before 29. And now he is talking about the rapture. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and another left. You understand that? This is now going to Matthew 24, explaining what happens with the virgins. Okay? The 10 virgins. Okay? 5 are taken and 5 are being left behind because they don't have the oil. So then again in chapter 25, he goes back and explains it even more in detail. Do you see how Matthew is going back and forth? Okay? It's not chronological. And most books are written that way. Okay? Daniel is written that way. Revelation is written that way. It's not chronological. It keeps going back and maybe explaining one of the events more in detail. So it is right here. So here we go. 40. 2 men are in the field. 2 women will grind with a hand mill. And 1 is taken, 1 is left behind. And then he says in 42, therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. Your Lord. That is talking about the rapture. Okay? You don't know when the rapture will happen. Because he will, this day or hour, nobody knows. Why don't they know it? Because only the Father knows. See, when you know about the wedding procedures of the Hebrews, the old wedding procedures, you know that the husband, it's the husband, really, the bridegroom, goes, prepares a place for the bride, and then when he is finished, the father tells him it's okay to go get the bride. The father will say, hey, yes, this room is ready, go get your bride. Not the bridegroom. So the father is the only one who knows when the bridegroom is going to get his bride. Okay? So, but it determines if and when the wedding chamber is finished. So here again, he says, nobody knows the day or the hour, because only the father knows it, not even the bridegroom. Okay? She also must be ready. Let me see where we're at. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day of the hour the Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had not known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect it. Hour. Okay? So most people don't expect him. So be ready. And again, chapter 25, the 10 virgins explain this a little more. Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants? And here again, he goes into detail, about what it means to be prepared. He will cut him. This is what at the end of this parable is said. In verse 51, he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What is this about? This is about people that are not ready when the rapture happens, okay? And they will be left behind. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why? Because they have to go through the wrath. Okay, which again we see now in chapter 25, where Jesus explains in more detail about the rapture. Okay, so you can see clearly where this rapture fits in. Clearly. Okay, well, I hope it's clear. But it is not this chronological, because in verse 29 and 30 and 31, that's about the end, after the wrath of God. See, that was kind of put in there. It should be really at the end of this chapter. Let's see. I would think it would have been better if they would put 29 through maybe 31 at the end of this whole chapter. Okay? Because that is really maybe put in there in the wrong spot, because that is at the end, after the rapture. We have this whole big thing from verse 32, well, let's say 36. We have the whole rapture thing happening. 32 is, I believe, still about, so really, let me see, 34. Yeah, 34 until 34. So 29, it's kind of hard. I'm going to get all confused myself. So 29 through 31 should be at the end, and then at 32 through 34 should be at the end of 28. And I hope you kind of understand that, because it is confusing. But that's why we need to be careful. And we cannot just pull out some verses and say, well, that's what it means. I'm coming to an end. I hope that made sense. Continue to read chapter 25 about the 10 virgins, because that's an important one too. And most people, they don't even quote the 10 virgins. That is such a good chapter about the rapture. Such a good chapter. And we need to understand, what happens during the rapture and why people don't make it into the rapture. So many people say, well, I hope I'm in the rapture, or, well, I wish I'm in the rapture, or, oh yeah, I'm in the rapture. But they have absolutely no idea. Why? Because you know what? 5 looked exactly like a true virgin. Okay? They were dressed, they act, they did everything. And that's what Jesus said at the end. You know what? They said, well, didn't we do this and didn't we do that for you? And Jesus said, no, I don't know you. Because they acted just like a normal, regular virgin. Okay? And they weren't. So be careful. The parable of the 10 virgins should really make you wake up and make sure that you're part of the rapture. This video is a little bit long, and but I hope it still is okay. Anyways, let the Holy Spirit guide you.